If you're like most Main Street business owners, each day can often feel overwhelming with the number of things that have to get done and the number of things that continually don't get done because there just isn't enough time in the day. Well, today I want to share the 1.5 productivity tools that can help to skyrocket your productivity and improve efficiency without sacrificing quality. Now, this won't solve every problem in your business, but it's a great first step. So stay tuned as we dive into the 1.5 tools that can help you skyrocket productivity this year. Now, the tool I'm talking about is a tool called GPT. Now, GPT is a free tool that is produced by OpenAI. You can go to openai.com and we'll put a link down below in the description. And what GPT does is it's an AI model designed to help with improving and assessing language, right? Now, why would that be a really important productivity? Well, if you think about how much time that we spend in communication and how important communication is both with our team, with our staff, with our employees, whatever, it's extremely important that we get communication right. So, what are some ways that GPT can help make your business much more productive this year? Well, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing to note is that there are 2 GPT models that are available for you to use. Again, both of these are absolutely free. The first is the GPT Playground. This is based on what's called GPT-3, and again, you don't need to know all the details about what that means. But the Playground is a more sophisticated language model that can do really kind of incredible things. The other one is what's called ChatGPT, and this is the one that you may have seen in the news or you may have seen or hear people talking about. And this one essentially builds on top of the Playground GPT-3 model, but gives it a more of a chat-based interface, which a lot of people find easier to use. Now, having said that, this one is a little slower than this one, and maybe it might not give you quite as great or thorough an answer for some kinds of requests, and I'll show you that as we get ready to dive in. So, what are some ways that we can be using GPT-3 or ChatGPT in order to make our businesses much more productive? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start really simple, and we're going to start with the Playground GPT model. And we'll go through examples in both of these so you can see some of the differences. But the first thing we're going to do is take something very simple like summarizing a blog post. So what we've got here is a blog post that we've written on our website. So we're going to go ahead and take this and we're going to just do a quick, can you please write me a summary of this blog post? Question mark. We're going to put a link in and then give it some space. And we're going to go ahead and see that now it's immediately generating a very short a summary of that blog post. If we go and we do the same thing in ChatGPT, we're going to see that it's going to take a little bit longer to get started, and then it's going to go ahead and start crafting the response. Now the response is going to be very similar in this case to the other one, but maybe a little bit more conversational. You can already tell this one is a little bit shorter than this one is, and so you can start to see sometimes that with GPT-3 you're going to get a more thorough answer versus with ChatGPT you might get something potentially a little bit shorter. Now it's also important to note that right now this is free beta software, and so again there's no cost to use it, but it is a little buggy and there are times when you might find that it's crashed. So why would we care about doing something like summarizing blog posts? Well, let's start with a very basic, imagine that there are things that we know we should read, things we want to read, and we might not have time to read the whole post, right? So one of the things that we'll do, one of the things I'll often do is I'll come in and say, hey, look, here's a post I want to read potentially. Let me go ahead and ask this thing to summarize it for me. I'll look at the summary and then decide if it's worth me going and investing more time in it. But more importantly, we're a web development company, right? So how might we use this technology in order to get more productive? And how could you use it in order to not just come up with a novel way for you to summarize long-form content very quickly, but also maybe improve the productivity of your marketing? Well, once we've got something like this, we've got our text summarized here, we might then go into a use case of starting to use the summary or use this information more productively. So let's imagine, one of the things that's very important for any website for SEO would be to write something like a meta description, right? And lots of people we see don't have meta descriptions on their on their websites or on their blog posts. So we might do something that says like, okay, we've got a meta description. So here is, can you please write me a meta description for this article? It should be no longer than, let's call it 200 characters, and encourage the reader to click to read more. Here is the text. And let's put it in quotation marks. And then come over here. And actually, let's just back it all the way up so we've got it. So it's all on one line. And then let's go ahead and ask it to do this. And so now we're going to go ahead and it's going to generate very quickly for us now this meta description. Now, for most of us, even for those of us who are in the industry and who copyright, we might have to sit down and kind of like really think about it. We might skim the article a couple of times. Well, now we've got a really nice meta description here. Discover the 4 powerful ways companies can use social proof to strengthen their website presence. Learn how to increase customer trust, improve SEO, and increase conversion with 11 examples, case studies, and more. Click to read more. And so we've got a pretty good meta description right here that we can now use inside of our website, which will improve search engine optimization. And we did all that in, I don't know, a couple of minutes because we just asked GPT to summarize the blog post and then write the meta description for us right away. So the ability to summarize content and then summarize the summary is a great way to not only be able to consume content much more quickly, but also to start producing micro content very, very quickly. Okay, so now that we've got a summary, we've got a meta description, we've got a summary of our post, we also know that we can feed it a URL and essentially get back some information. Now let's start thinking about other areas where we know we should spend time, but we don't feel like there's enough time, particularly when it comes to things like managing our social media, our Facebook, Twitter, etc. Things where we know we need to be having content out there in order to have a healthy profile, but it can often take quite a bit of time to craft, good posts for sort of purely content consumption, right? There's lots of different ways to use social media, so we're just going to pick a very simple scenario here, which is we just want to be able to demonstrate and provide these summaries to people on our network. So let's go here and let's go ahead and say, let's go back to my initial post and we say, can you write me 3 tweets for this article? Okay, now we're going to try again. We're going to try this both in the playground, and we're going to go ahead and try this in ChatGPT again so you can see the difference. Let's just copy that whole thing. Again, why waste a bunch of time? Let's grab this. We're going to feed the same thing to ChatGPT, just so that way we can see the difference. And while that's processing, so here we see 3 tweets. Strengthen your website presence with social proof, learn how to increase customer trust and conversions, and then it's got some hashtags. Same thing here, same thing here. Let's also ask, can you write me a Facebook post for this article? And here now we've got something that's a little bit a little longer because again with Facebook we can have slightly longer content. So now let's go over here. Let's see what the meta description is that it gave us. This one again you can see a little more conversational. Instead of click to read, we have something like read now. And then we're going to go ahead and give it that same example. Can you write me 3 tweets? And now it's going to do a similar thing. Want to boost your website's appeal, learn how to harness with, increase customer trust, improve SEO. And again, you're going to see now, we've just, in the span of just a few seconds, we've got 6 tweets that we're able to go ahead and use and manipulate. We've also got, now can you write me a Facebook post? Question mark. And now we're going to see that we've got now 2 Facebook posts. And again, I only chose 1 because I'm saving time. But ultimately, you can now see how we're able to start producing lots of micro content very, very quickly. Now, you absolutely are going to want to read this and make sure that it actually makes sense. There's probably some best practices around hashtags. And again, we're not a social media agency, so I couldn't tell you what all those are. But what I can tell you is that for most of us that just have to maintain an active enough profile and you have content, let's say in the form of blogs or e-commerce products, this is a great way to start generating a lot of content very, very quickly that you can then use on your site, you can then use on your profiles in different ways. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use GPT to help us start writing emails. Now, if you're like me, there's probably tons and tons of emails coming in every day that you then need to respond to, and these can often take quite a bit of time. Or if you're like me, you have a staff of people that's also responding back and forth to customers, and sometimes you look at their messages and you're like, oh, why did we say that? Or why did we say that like that? Or that's not clear, right? And the reality is that a lot of communication is currently happening via email, and it can be difficult to get email right, especially because with email, there is tonality and things like that that come through that you want to make sure are proper. So one of the things that you might want to do is, and this is where I found ChatGPT to be a little bit helpful, a little better because it is a little more conversational than this. But let's imagine that we want to write an email to a customer to re-engage them on a conversation maybe we started last quarter. So here we go. So it gives us a subject. Follow up on SEO services for whatever. Dear prospect name, hope this email finds you well. Want to follow up with you regarding our previous conversation about SEO services for your company. It's been a few months. Wanted to see if this is still something you're interested in exploring. As you may know, it's a crucial aspect. And it's going to go through and start crafting this email. Now, just to see how this is a little bit different than if we were to do it here. And here we go. We have a slightly different email, same kind of content. And if we were to look at these side by side, and I'll download them and put them somewhere that you can access them in the description, you'll see that there's a couple that they're slightly different in terms of the tone. But the gist of it is the same. Now imagine any number of emails that you write on any given day. It could be a dissatisfied customer. How do you write an email apologizing without backing down, right? So that might be something you might want to write some emails around. Maybe you want to let your customers know that there's going to be an increase in price and you're not sure the best way to describe that. Maybe you've got scope creep and something you're working on and you need to be able to communicate that. And by the way, we're talking about email, but let's say you have to make a phone call and it's the same kind of thing. You need to call a customer and let them know that they're out of scope and there's something that they might need to pay for that they weren't expecting to. You could essentially ask ChatGPT to give you this response, and then when you're on the phone, you basically read off the response or the tone of the response in order to make sure that it's clear. So we're using the language model in this case for email text to text, but it doesn't have to be. You can still take this information and use it in any other way. Maybe you need to have a difficult conversation with an employee and you want to figure out, can you help me have a difficult conversation with an employee? Conversation with an employee whose performance has lagged lately. Please help me please help me to motivate them while letting them know it needs to get fixed ASAP. Okay, and so we'll let the GPT engine run, but now you can imagine, here we go, we're going to give a little script. And it's going to tell us in this case, hey, what are some ways that we can approach this very, very difficult conversation? And again, I might have these as a way to start preparing for that conversation instead of simply just emailing back and forth. So again, we're using the language model, not necessarily for email, but we're also using it in order to give us scripts and to give us frameworks for other kinds of communication that we might need to have in the course of everyday business. Another really cool thing that GPT can do is help you with spreadsheet and Google Sheet formulas. So let's imagine that I've got a formula here and I've got a table somewhere where I've got a list of items that we sell or services that we sell, and I need to be able to put together a quote for somebody, and I want to get in here the base price of this particular item. And I'm not sure the best way to do that, but I know there's a formula in Excel that can do this for me. So I might go ahead and go into something like GPT and say, I have a Google Sheet with a row of information. I should say actually maybe a table of information. In one column, let's say column A is the service name, and in the other column, we'll call it column B, is the price. On a different sheet, I need to look up the price in column B based on the service name in column A. How do I do that? In Google Sheets. Okay? And it's going to start telling me I can use a VLOOKUP function. And it tells me how the VLOOKUP function works, and then it will give me an example of how I might use it. Now, again, let's just take a look and see how these two are going to be slightly different. And here, I might then start to look at ChatGPT as a way to start iterating on this. So here we go. It's going to give me the same thing. Use the VLOOKUP formula based on this. It's going to give me the syntax and an example, except here you can start to see that it's actually going to explain the example and explain the algorithm a little bit more. So here it's going to look up this, give me the sheet, tell me what column it's in, and then how to do it. So let's imagine it's going to tell me to replace the service name with the specific service name you want to search for. And what's important about ChatGPT versus the playground is this is more iterative. So let's imagine that I want to update this just a smidge, and I'm going to say that the, actually what was this called? This is in the unit pricing and costs table or page. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, that's in the unit costs page, and it looks like it's actually in column number 13. So let's go and say, okay, the services are listed in a workbook called Unit Price and Costs, and the value I'm looking for is in column 13. The page I'm currently on is called Quote Page, and I will put the service name in column A and expect the and put the VLOOKUP in column B. How does that change the formula? Okay, and so I'm giving it a little bit more context. Now, I will say this, we've tried this in a couple of different domains. So sometimes it's when it starts to give it a little bit more context, in some cases what it'll do is it'll kind of forget what it said before. But in many cases, here's what it'll do. So now it's going to go ahead and it's going to actually tell me what spreadsheet I need to go look in. So now, it said before, it said sheet A, sheet 1, AB2. Now it's telling me to go to the exact sheet that I need and which column. Now it's no longer column 2 because in my example, I was just trying to get it ready. Now I'm telling it, okay, it's actually in column 13. So now it's looking in column 13 as appropriate, and it's referring now to cell A1, or sorry, A2, which is where I told it I was going to put that information. And so now it's updating my formula based on the additional information that I gave it. And what this means is that as we're working through the problem, you can start to see it troubleshoot and be able to get a little bit clearer at putting together exactly what you want. And I'll show a very simple example, right? So this thing can't just do Google Sheets. It can also do this with code. Now, there's a good chance you're probably not writing any code. Totally fine. What I want to do is just share the example. So here I had a CSV file, and I basically was telling it, hey, can you help me write a function to do that? And it did it. And then I said, well, it's actually not finding it. Let me change the route. And then it's now walking me through the different steps. Got it. Okay, it didn't generate this one thing here. Can you make sure it generates that? And so it does another update, and I say, actually, you know what? First one was closer. Let's make it do this. Sorry for the confusion. Look at that. It apologizes. How fun is that? And then it starts to rewrite it. And so this whole time, it's iteratively going through the functions that I'm requesting, and it allows for me to get to home in so that as I'm running through each step, it's then giving me the next thing that I need to do, or it's at least helping me to learn what the next thing is. Now, again, this is not going to be 100% bug-free. You'll have to work through it, but that's where I would start to use ChatGPT versus the playground, because ChatGPT tends to be a little bit better at remembering what was going on before and then stringing through to the next thing. But the point is, if you have to use spreadsheets and you're not sure how to do different things in spreadsheets, this is a great way for you to start leveraging the power of spreadsheets, or the power of GPT in your spreadsheets in order to make your spreadsheets more robust and make them better at whatever they need to be. And for many of you that have to put together spreadsheets but aren't good at it, and it can take a lot of time, this is a great way to save a ton of time on spreadsheet generation. Now, there's one last thing I want to share with you about ChatGPT that I think can be really helpful and start to transform how you are not only thinking about your own work, but how you can start thinking about new ways to use ChatGPT. But first, if you found any of this helpful, or you think any of these tools are ones that you would use, head into the comments and say, hey, that's a great tip, I'm going to use this, or hey, I've tried doing this, and what about that? I'd love to read those comments and see how you're using this to be more productive. And if you found this helpful, please take a second to go ahead and hit subscribe, like the video, which will help me to make sure, one, that I'm producing something valuable, but two, also make sure that other people like yourself can see it and take advantage of the information that we're making available to other people just like you and other Main Street communities around the world. All right, so the last thing that I want to call to mind is that ChatGPT, right, we're talking about it predominantly from a language perspective, but there's a lot of ways in which this thing can even sort of replace what you're using Google for, right? So for example, we might want to ask it a question. Let me see if I can find one that we've already asked before. So here we go. So here was some research I was doing before on some browser testing automation software. Again, my specific use case, not yours. Okay, so what are some alternatives to this tool that are still JavaScript based and allow for automated blah, 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 blah? And here it goes. There are several alternatives, and it starts to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in fact, I looked at these 6 and I said, oh, actually, this one will work perfectly. And so now we're building out some work on that one. Now, putting this into Google, I would have to do something like alternatives to Selenium JS based. And if I do this in Google, so it gives me a couple of bullets here, but now I have to go in and start clicking to go and see, okay, do I want to go and look at that one? Let me open a new tab. This isn't really relevant for what I'm looking for. Okay, a couple of different alternatives. So now I'm opening up multiple tabs in order to go and do some research. Whereas right here, this immediately told me, here's a pretty good frame, and it gives me a short enough description that allows me to recognize, okay, well, what is this and why might I want to use this? And so here, and then I can follow it up. So instead of me having to go and read a bunch of articles, I can now say, okay, well, wait a minute, let's look at Puppeteer. Does that one allow for this? Yeah, it does, and here's how you would do that, okay? But what about Safari? Does it render in Safari? Because that was important. Nope, doesn't render in Safari. Oh, okay, so what about Microsoft? Nope, doesn't support Microsoft. Okay, so this isn't going to work for us, right? And so then I start looking, okay, well, now let's talk about Puppeteer versus Playwright. And so this whole set of search now, right? So now I'm using this as a search engine and as a learning engine that is conversational versus having to go and click on a bunch of these different sites in order to get the same question answered. Now, what does that mean for you currently from a productivity standpoint? It means that there are probably times that you could be going to Google looking for information that if you were just to ask ChatGPT, there's a good chance it could give you a reasonably good answer and get you started moving down that path. Now, having said that, the model itself, I think, has only been updated through 2021. So any events past 2021, it's not really going to have a lot of knowledge on, which means that there are some times when you might get back some information that is either incorrect or incomplete because things have evolved since, the end of 2021. But it does mean that from a productivity standpoint, you can at least use this as a way to start framing the things you're currently searching for in Google in a way to sort of do it iteratively and conversationally. Now, for you in the future, it also means that those of you that are producing content, those of us that are producing content rather, that are actually able to get indexed and show up, that search itself is going to change. Search is no longer going to be just put into Google and show up. Search is going to be, do you have information on your site that is structured and that is helpful and that is unique so that it can show up in a different interface, a conversational interface like a GPT interface or an Alexa or a Siri. And so what that means is that for those of us that have information to contribute to the world, we've got to be a lot more intentional about how we produce content. But that's a subject for a different video. For now, for us, talking about productivity, using ChatGPT instead of Google is a great way to start getting information or getting questions answered that you have that you might otherwise take to Google, and getting them back quickly, and also getting them back iteratively so that you're able to continually feed it more and more refinements on what you're thinking in order to be able to get closer and closer to the answer you're looking for. So there you have it, a couple of examples on how you can use ChatGPT and GPT-3 to make your workflows much more productive, your conversations much more productive, your content production much more productive, and even frankly your use of Google much more productive. Now, I do want to be really clear, though, about this thing. So I mentioned before that this model has been trained up until 2021. And again, I don't need to explain right now what all that means, but you should know that anything after 2021 is likely not going to be in the index and available for use. But for you, what it might mean is that there's a chance that when you're asking it different questions that you should probably trust but verify. Okay, that's a really important thing. The other thing to recognize is that ChatGPT or GPT-3 are not necessarily replacements for all kind of communication. That these you should be treated as drafts, and that really it's up to you as the person using the content, one, to make sure that it's not plagiarized and that there is no copyright violation, but also to make sure that it's actually right for your brand's voice, right for the way you want to be talking about things, and that it's actually accurate for the way that you understand what you're trying to communicate. Having said that, we've tried using ChatGPT to try and see, is it any good at writing blog posts? And we found it to be mediocre. We also tried to see if ChatGPT was good at writing advertising scripts. And again, kind of mediocre. However, it is a great tool for starting the process, and oftentimes the blank page can be the most intimidating thing. The last thing that I'll mention about ChatGPT is that the prompts matter a lot. So you saw as I was going through it, I was writing and then kind of rewriting prompts. I was giving them long prompts. I was trying to get very specific. If you give it very general prompts, you're going to find that the results are going to be very, very mediocre. The more specific you can make the request, I'm looking exactly for this. It needs to be about this long. I want exactly this kind of tone. The more specific you can make the request, then the better, frankly, your response will be. And this is why we're building a WordPress plugin right now. We'll bring the power of ChatGPT, or GPT-3 rather, into WordPress. So that way, and we'll pre-engineer prompts for you, so that way you're able to go ahead and click the button and it'll pre-write the prompt and then you can fill it in with your details. So stay tuned for that. If you aren't following us, make sure you're following us on at least YouTube, but certainly on Facebook and whatever other social media we're putting out there. So that way you can see when that comes up. And of course, when it's live, we'll link to it in the notes here as well. Again, hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, please take a second to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.